Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Azure Flash News, episode 81. And it is
12/6
12/6, December 6th,
says over
2019. Yes, it does right there. It says it 50 places, but I still looked at my watch.
there. You know, it's interesting. Okay, so that's.
I mean, we're old
No,
that we
but
look
no,
at our watches,
we're-
right?
But that's the thing, right? So human behavior is interesting, right? Programmed behavior.
Oh, man.
Like that was a non. That was an unconscious response.
I just am
what
like, I
day
got to
is
look
it?
at,
Boom,
and even if I
right?
don't have a watch on.
Yeah, you'll
or-
look at your
I
wrist.
don't know, whatever. Okay.
We are
Okay, boomer.
trainable. We're trainable. Okay, boomer.
Okay,
yeah.
boomer.
I am. That's. Hey, you know what? I'm actually not. We're not.
I
boomers.
know, but it still is like a
We might as well
general
be.
expression
Yeah.
of disdain for
Yeah.
one's prior generation.
Yeah. So okay.
Okay,
So,
boomer.
Well, blame the generation before.
That's right. Just
Blame the
it's-
previous administration.
You know what? Kids, just blame us. It's
Yeah,
fine. We
we're
can
fine.
take
We'll take
we can
it.
take the heat.
That's right.
Yeah, it's our fault.
Frankly, we are at fault.
Kind of is.
I'll
Usually.
take blame.
Okay, anyway,
Awesome.
we're actually here to talk about Azure.
I know, right? Happy Friday. I'm looking outside. We got some snow on the ground. We got some.
Oh yeah. Have you
chill
been
in the
have you been
air.
skiing yet?
I have skiing. How dare you call it snowboarding? No, I'm kidding.
It's
I'm
it's
kidding.
a term in general.
We're a blended household. We
Yes.
ski and snowboard. I have not been on the slopes yet.
Okay.
I will be out on the 14th for an all-day instructor clinic.
Oh yeah, because you
um,
teach.
I do. We
Awesome.
start up officially in January
Yeah.
for 8 weeks then. But we've been looking at different options, potentially trying to sneak out maybe after Christmas to Whistler or
Ooh.
Colorado, but we'll
Oh,
see.
Big mountains.
Yeah.
Although we kind of have a big one here in Minnesota. We have Lutz in it.
yeah. Well, it's decent.
Cold. but
Well, once you've been to Whistler.
it's hard to go back. Okay. Anyway. All right. So what's on the list for
Well,
Azure this week?
So obviously in the last couple, no, I shouldn't say the last couple weeks, things have still been kind of rolling out, leaking out a little bit with some of the post follow-ups with Ignite, right? So you
Yep.
have Azure Arc, which we've talked about, which is kind of your single pane of glass, policy-based
Bringing
backplane.
Yeah,
I mean,
bringing the ARM API
Yeah,
on-prem.
exactly. Thank
so
you.
how do you use Azure to manage your on-prem
on-prem.
resources?
Yep,
And-
yep.
so,
And then, of course,
Pretty cool.
with Synapse, right? That was a big announcement with Ignite. So there's been some cool stuff, but so in the last couple of weeks, we've seen kind of the follow-up, so if you will, right? We had the big splash announcements, and then there's been some follow-ups, kind of in the weeds. This is really what we're talking about when
Yeah.
we talk about this. So
yep.
that's been pretty cool. Having said that, there has been some incremental changes. There's been a few net new things. Some enhancements to Azure Advisor. We'll talk about that.
Yep.
An announcement where yet again, I think even it was probably the last time you and I were together.
Yeah.
I was
It was-
lambasting the chief marketing officer for AWS because I'm sorry, I just find it so egregious that they sit and talk
Let's
about.
just say it's a stretch.
Okay, it's a stretch. It's a
Let's
stretch.
be nice.
Anyway, you're fair enough. You're right. I am not being
be
a
nice.
Minnesota.
But
This isn't not new. Some Kubernetes capabilities. It's not
Mhm.
new, but it's a good heads up for this. Extended file system stuff in Data Lake, and then last but definitely not least, kind of
yeah.
a new announcement around Azure Blob Storage with some change management. So
cool stuff.
yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Okay, so the first one here is about Azure Advisor. What?
Yeah.
So if somebody doesn't know what Azure Advisor is, which they may not,
Correct. That's
because
fair.
it's kind of not in your face in the Azure portal, but
No,
you should
it's
know
really
about
not.
it.
It's
What
really
is it?
not. So Azure Advisor basically is a tool, as the name implies, advisory tool, right? So
Mhm.
it's going to give you advice around security, around right-sizing workloads, around cost management, around best practices. For example, if Azure Advisor is really complementary to, I'll say, Security Center in some respects, because it does have some security advice, but it'll
does.
also tell you, hey, this machine has only been running at 10% CPU utilization for, it basically
few
right
weeks.
right size this, you could save money by, basically changing the SKU of the VM that you have
Yep.
provisioned.
It also might say, or changing the SKU or purchasing a
Or RI,
reserved
instance.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it might suggest that.
Yep.
Or it's like you've had this VM on forever and it's been busy forever.
Yes.
So why don't you purchase a
Reserved instance. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, and so we continue to add new things, and like you said, Azure Advisor can include both cost and security
Yep.
updates. We kind of surface those both there.
Yep.
And we just continue to keep adding stuff. Like
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think there's also some stuff around Cosmos DB now around reserved instances or over or under provisioning. So
Yep.
So
So
anyway.
categorically, we've got high availability, we've got security, we've
Oh,
got
yeah.
performance, we've got cost. And today's announcement or today's topic of discussion is operational excellence, right? So, yeah, it
Everybody
seems
wants to be
excellent. Well,
party on,
they
win,
do,
squirrel.
but it seems. I mean, like, what does that mean? Operational excellence.
I don't know.
I mean,
Sounds like
like
kind of pie in the
it
sky.
really does. It really does. But so
Let's make it
essentially,
real.
so there are some operational recommendations, right? So the recommendations and advisor at launch for operational excellence are going to be service
Oh.
health alerts, right? So you can be proactive and responding to, or more proactive, I should say,
And
in
an
responding to
Azure
potential
Azure
issues.
service health is when our service
Correct.
is having trouble,
Correct.
not your application. Like your application might break
Yep.
because of a deployment or something.
Right.
But this is when it's our problem, one of our services.
Yep. So excellence recommendations. Also designing storage accounts, to avoid hitting subscription limits, right? Because obviously we've got those caps. Access to cloud experts. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Ensure you have access to Azure cloud experts when you need it. But well, I'm sorry.
Anyway,
so repair invalid log alert rules is interesting. I know sometimes when you're talking about operational excellence, logging and log analytics and that stuff is a big piece of that. So making sure that you are actually getting log alerting rules for the right things at the right times, that's important.
I mean, that sort of observability of your infrastructure to understand how you're performing, when things are broken.
Exactly.
It's easy to take that for granted.
Oh, yeah.
And so you really have to make sure and pay attention to that.
And last but definitely not least is best practices for Azure policy, tag management, geo-compliance requirements, VM audits for managed disks, et cetera, making sure that you're following, and again, those are kind of, I'll say, from a maturity perspective, those are things that you do almost by default, but not everybody does.
Yeah. There's additional information. There's a link here that says, go through the documentation. I'll just click it here briefly just to show people. But there are some more details on the operational excellence piece, and we will continue to add stuff. But I think the main go-to is go visit Azure Advisor.
Yep.
And take a look, and you'll see, for those of you watching on like YouTube, you'll see this this screen here, with this little dashboard, I guess. And it has a lot of things for you to take a look at and maybe act upon. And you'll notice here, I don't know, there's big dollars for this sort of example here, $25,000 saved.
Oh, saved, yeah. And that's, I mean, and I like that it's high impact, medium impact, low impact. So everybody's got a day job, and it gives you an opportunity to focus on, if there's some high impact changes you can make, to go in and focus on those, right? I mean, it gives you can take multiple passes at really achieving operational excellence. So, a good enhancement to Azure Advisor.
Some people think SQL is faster and cheaper on AWS.
Who thinks that?
I don't know.
I would really like to know who thinks that. Or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that.
We know who thinks it.
Who believes that?
We know who thinks it.
Yes, who believes it. Thinking it and believing it, I guess, aren't necessarily synonymous. But
so I like to let data do the talking.
I know this about you.
Yeah, and so I've just kind of scrolled down here. For those of you listening while you're not mowing the lawn right now, you're probably shoveling maybe. If you're listening,
you could be down south mowing the lawn.
Could.
It's summer someplace.
You could actually come to think of it. Yeah,
Right.
If I were still down in Texas, I might actually still be mowing the lawn. But you'll notice here that we have some charts here for price performance, or actually performance, and then price. And you'll notice that. Well, we got to say it because
contrary to some popular opinions, no, I wouldn't even say popular.
The performance of SQL Server on Azure is excellent.
Yeah,
we have the ability to run it incredibly
we're almost
well.
3.5 times faster.
Yeah,
almost 3.5 times faster.
Did we come up with these metrics?
No. These are independent third-party research firm. Gigome was the one who published their study, and we're just basically highlighting the fact that you're being sold a bill of goods that isn't what you think it is if you're being told otherwise.
Yeah. So
and the reality is pricing 87% cheaper.
Yeah.
87% cheaper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who doesn't want to do it?
Less expensive.
Yes. And nothing is cheap.
No.
Cheap sounds cheap.
Cheap does sound cheap.
Yes.
And who doesn't like it less expensive?
Yeah. So if you're running SQL Server and you're not running it on Azure, you should think about that.
Yeah.
You should think about whether you're getting the most out of your shareholder value, right? That money could go into investing into other projects at your company.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. So again, it's one thing to be, competitive but it's another thing to make interesting statements.
If you haven't tried SQL Server on Azure, give it a try.
Please.
There's like 3 different ways to try it. You can do
That's a great point.
Azure SQL database.
It's not a one size fits all thing. Right?
No. We have many options. You can get a database and just run that database and not have to manage it. That's Azure SQL database.
Yeah.
You can run SQL managed instance, which means it's a full copy of SQL Server, but managed by us.
Yeah.
And then you can also install SQL Server
on a VM.
Bring your own license and on a VM.
Absolutely.
So we have all of these different options for you, depending upon maybe you're bringing a SQL Server from on-prem. That might be one way to do it. Or if you're developing a brand new app that you want to use SQL Server, there's all different kinds of options.
And the thing is, anybody who's ever heard me say anything ever about the cloud knows that I've got a philosophy, and that's exploit the cloud, right?
Yeah.
So if you already have SQL Server licenses on-prem that you're not using, do not pay for SQL Server twice. Please, please, please don't double pay. Take those licenses, use AHub, right?
Bring it to the cloud.
Bring it to the cloud. And so, yeah, please, if your strategy is we want to move all our data and it needs to go in your SQL Server shop, or even if you're not, there have been cost comparison and performance studies against other providers as well between SQL Server and like Oracle. And I mean, all great products, don't get me wrong, but
very
at the
capable.
same time, very capable. That's a great way to put it. I mean, from a price performance perspective, I think we really shine.
Yeah.
So
definitely
encourage you to.
I spent about 3 years as a SQL Server technical specialist. So.
I know and I can't not every time I see data, I can't not think, oh, this Mark would be interested in this, and because you're so much more than data.
Yeah.
I mean, way bigger than data. But every time I see a data announcement, I'm like, oh, Mark's gonna be excited about this.
Yeah, it's true though.
It is, and I hate the typecast, but
that's okay. I'm
the
SQL guy. That's all right.
So if we were actors, you would always get the sequel part. You would always be the DBA in the hacker movies.
I would love that. That'd be awesome.
So Martin Scorsese, if you're
watching, I'm your man.
He's your SQL Server.
Yeah, that's right.
Guru
DBA.
Guy.
That's right. All right. Now we're going to shift gears to Kubernetes.
Yes, we are. Okay.
You know, like a record when you go.
We
like
didn't just shift gears. I mean, we went from stateful, data, to container, ephemeral, immutable, not state. They're stateless.
Stateless.
We just went to the other end of the spectrum. You see what we did there? We just literally went to the other end of the spectrum.
Come with us.
That's how wide Azure is.
Come with us. Okay, so this is interesting because there's so much work going on in Microsoft with the Kubernetes platform. You think it's all centered around Google? It's not. Okay. So Microsoft is doing a lot of work. At least one, or if not a few, of the big names from Google that worked on Kubernetes actually work at Microsoft now.
Yep.
And so we're very big contributors to the Kubernetes platform.
Yep.
So Microsoft is a great place to run your Kubernetes.
Absolutely.
Azure is.
If when you think of containers and you think of orchestration, right now Kubernetes is really kind of the prevailing tool of choice, right? I mean, you can't have a containers conversation without talking about Kubernetes. And arguably, if you're talking about academically, if you're talking about Kubernetes, you're talking about Brendan Burns at some point, right?
Yep,
because he was one of the co-inventors who now works for Microsoft. The other two, I believe, are not working at any of the cloud vendors. But I mean, that's really irrelevant. So the point is, though, there's to your point, Kubernetes is kind of top of mind, I think, for orchestration and the containerization space. And we keep making some really cool announcements around AKS. We talked about Dapper, and we've got all these other things going on. But today, this isn't necessarily new, correct?
I don't think so. It says it's new, although in some ways I think this app gateway ingress controller has been around a little while.
Yep.
But I think it's kind of an introduction to the market. I think it's been kind of like we've been kind of incubating it. But the one thing you have to understand about Kubernetes is that if you want to deploy Kubernetes, you're actually making a commitment to do a lot of other things.
Oh, yeah.
It takes a lot of stuff. It's actually pretty complicated. There's a lot of value there, but it's also pretty complicated, and we're trying to work hard to make it simpler.
We're trying to demystify as well as potentially I'll say, protect you from some of the complexities or remove you from, right? I mean, so there's the demystification of it, obviously, which introduces you to the complexities. So we want to show you, listen, there's a lot there, but here's how we're going to help you not have to deal with all that stuff, right?
Yeah. So one of the things you have to do when you get started in Kubernetes is you deploy your pods, and then after that you deploy a thing called a service, which basically load balances your pods. And a service gets an IP address, which sounds great until you start saying, well, if I've got 50 services, how do I keep up with all of that business?
Right.
And so you need what's called an ingress controller. And an ingress controller means you have one HTTP endpoint and routes on the end that help you get directed to the right service. So in other words, it might be myKubernetesCluster.contoso.com/service1.
Yep.
myKubernetesCluster.contoso.com/service2.
Yep.
And this ingress controller routes you to all of the right places on your Kubernetes. And since these pods are so ephemeral, these services go up and down. The IP address changes.
Crazy.
So you need something automated.
Absolutely.
And there are things you can deploy onto Kubernetes to do that. Traffic is one of them. TRAFEI, whatever it is.
Yep.
Traffic. These open source names are just too hard for me. I can handle my.
Boomer.
Yeah. I set myself up for that.
You did. You really did.
I had meant to.
It's
okay. It's good.
No, but you're right. I mean, there's so much. There's so much there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there really is.
So you need to set up this ingress controller, and we want to make it to where these things are native instead of something else you have to deploy onto Kubernetes.
Yep.
We have one. We have something that does this reverse proxy, and it's called App Gateway.
We do, but what's interesting about this though is it says we're excited to offer a new solution. So this is in that new thing. I mean, so it basically, okay, first and foremost, open source.
Yeah.
Open source application gateway ingress controller, or AGIC. Okay, but open source, again, Microsoft open source application, okay. But it's cool because you can leverage the app gateway to basically expose that software to the interwebs, right? Just like you said. So you've got this essentially reverse proxy with path-based routing, right? So WAC service 1, WAC service 2. Then behind the scenes, you've got the API service that is part of, or the API server, right? Which is part of basically where do all these things live? This one just got moved, we have to update it. This one is over here. This one, this is load balance. So here's the IP to the load balancer, et cetera, et cetera. This takes a lot of that ingress, the requests that are coming in, and routes them appropriately from the interwebs.
Yeah. So the ingress controller, it says end-to-end SSL, but I think in some ways it's actually kind of provides not SSL. And the whole point is to say you can terminate SSL.
SSL offloading.
Yeah, SSL offloading, which kind of means not end-to-end SSL.
Right.
Although you can do end-to-end SSL. You absolutely can re-encrypt that traffic on the way back to Kubernetes. But a lot of times people actually want to offload that.
Absolutely.
And so then you do that on App Gateway, and you say, okay, App Gateway is in my trusted zone, and then you just leave it as HTTP traffic.
Right.
So that's something you can do, and
so,
get that from App Gateway.
So one thing though that again, this kind of it's when I think about containerization and I think about you're not supposed to care where it lives. It's supposed to be stateless, right? It's just supposed to be and so this ingress controller does support cookie-based affinity, and so sometimes that's I know, and
unnecessary evil.
And that's where I am in my head reconciling being a purist with being a pragmatist. And a pragmatist says, yeah, sometimes you want to keep that affinity to that particular instance of that service for certain reasons, but it does support it, just in case you need it. So you've got URL routing, you've got cookie-based affinity, you can do SSL termination and or you can do end-to-end SSL, to your point. You've got public, private, and hybrid website support, as well as an integration web application firewall, right?
That's
so the
right.
WAF is a
big
good part of it.
Yes,
That's
absolutely,
a really big
Rick,
part
good
of
point.
it, right?
App Gateway has a WAF inside it. And I wanted to bring this up because I think this is a really good picture here.
Oh, good.
And you'll notice here that the in-cluster ingress controller, which is on the left, is the sort of quote-unquote traditional way, or the existing way to do this. And what that means is that there's some sort of a software load balancer that points you to an ingress CTRLR controller. That's a Silicon Valley spelling.
Cuddle.
Service. And then there is actually a pod, an ingress controller pod. In other words, an application
which is responsible, basically dedicated for that.
For routing you to the right pod, which is essentially your code.
And then, of course, it has to be highly available, so there has to be multiple instances, right?
And it runs one on each node, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, but now you'll notice here on the right-hand side, the App Gateway ingress controller, or the AGIC, The customer traffic hits app gateway, and then the app gateway directly routes you to those pods. So I think it's a really nice way to think about how we can sort of offload that workload out of Kubernetes, simplify the Kubernetes world. It's already complicated enough.
Yes, it is.
And so how do we offload that to Azure services so that there might be, instead of just having a Kubernetes cluster with a whole ton of stuff running on it,
Yep.
we're actually going to kind of take and offload some of that stuff so that you keep your Kubernetes deployment a little bit more simple.
Yeah, well, and again, it's already complex, but so what's interesting though is with the in-cluster load balancer that does all the data path operations and the one on the left, right? You're leveraging KubeNet, right? So ingress controller, so that kind of makes an extra hop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the ingress controller for the AGIC, right? You've got the AKS Advanced Networking, which is the Azure CNI, right?
Yep, that's right. And so when you use the Azure CNI, each of your pods gets an IP address from your virtual network. And while that does cost extra IP addresses, it makes the networking architecture much simpler. And so now your workloads, those pods are just directly on your network.
Boom.
So anyway, so that's a good thing. If you're really tight on IP addresses, you can definitely use KubeNet and have that overlay network, but it definitely adds another layer of complexity. And like I was saying, Kubernetes is complex enough. It's always beneficial to simplify your Kubernetes deployment as much as you can, no more.
Well, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Keep things as simple as possible, but no simpler. That's what Einstein said.
Right.
So, so anyway, so go check it out. It's something for you to try out, and if you're running Kubernetes today, this is another way for you to, if you'll come to AKS and come to App Gateway,
yep.
we can help you run more parts of your Kubernetes service as a part of the Azure support. So in other words, if you have a problem with your ingress controller,
yep.
now it's an Azure service. You
right.
call Microsoft.
Exactly.
So instead of deploying traffic and then, I don't know what, opening up an issue on GitHub, like if you have a problem.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
That's the challenge with open source is like if you have a problem or find a bug,
unless you have an enterprise support agreement with somebody who will take that on, then
that's right.
Yeah,
and you're kind of just opening up an
point.
issue. So but this way you can actually call us and we'll help you.
Yeah, no, and that's the nice thing about it. And usually the open source community is pretty responsive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're pretty fast to jump, but I always go back to if you have an SLA with your customer, how do you guarantee that SLA if you don't have an SLA with your capabilities that you're providing them? So. And performance maybe is the last thing. There's
I was just going to say that.
Solution. There's an example, very specific example that they give with. They tell you the configuration that they created, but in that scenario, the application gateway latency was basically the mean latency was 480 milliseconds per request, whereas the in-cluster ingress controller that would be native is 710 milliseconds per request. So almost.
It's funny because you might think that the in-cluster would be faster because but it's not.
No, it's just because there's that extra layer of complexity with the networking and stuff.
So,
and that's not, nobody's saying that's a bad thing. It's just saying this will, like you said, it's cloud service, it's first party supported, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it has a WAF.
Yes, and there's a web application firewall built in, which will protect you from the
OWASP.
top 10 OWASP vulnerabilities. There's OWASP
and custom
3.0.
rules.
Yeah,
and custom rules.
And custom rules. Yeah.
So.
But you're not rolling your own, because in that case, then you might have to probably deploy yet another service that's acting as a web application.
Yeah.
So so consolidation.
Give it a try. Give it a try.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. So Azure Data Lake Storage Extended File System. Hey, I don't know what's going on there. Extended File System Programming.
So there's public preview, so there's the .NET SDK, the Python SDK, the Java SDK, PowerShell, CLI, et cetera, right? So for Gen 2. So if you've used a familiar file system programming model, you can use the same thing using .NET, Python, Java, et cetera, right?
Yep.
But what's nice about this is you can incorporate these operations in your CI/CD pipeline, right? So for automation, for big data workloads, there's a lot of different things you can do there in that respect. It does include support for CRUD operations for the file system, right? So you've got directories, files, permissions, You know, the file system semantics in the file system Gen 2 is basically surfaced through these programming capabilities.
Yeah.
Right. So
I mean, really, we just have to provide
well,
all
yeah,
of these different
I agree.
SDKs, and
I
so
agree. We don't look at this announcement and go, wow, this is a big splash
can you
announcement.
believe we're
I know, right?
multi-platform?
No,
I
this
mean,
is table stakes.
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Let's
we
be
need to do
honest.
this, and we're really glad to do this. We want to meet customers where they are, so
Absolutely.
we want to support Python, Java, just as much as we support .NET.
Absolutely.
So, because that's important. I mean, there's obviously a very large .NET contingency, so we
Yep.
need to support that. But
Yep.
there's some really great stuff happening in Python and Java as well.
Yeah.
And
Gosh, yeah.
unfortunately, we can't support every language. But what I will say is, my guess is that if there's a language missing here that you think is crazy super
Oh, yeah.
important, go to the user feedback. What is that? User voice.
User
Isn't that-
voice.
Yeah, user voice.
Yep.
And you can provide feedback on this kind of stuff. So
Absolutely.
check it out.
You know,
Pretty
the
cool.
one thing too is it's the multi-protocol access, right? So with data lake storage, it's not just about you've got HDFS, you've got HTTPS, you've got a couple different protocols to access the data lake storage. So I think that it's important to note that that's been GA since wow. I was going to say for a while, but not really. since almost the end of last month. So just recently we GA'd the protocol support. So that's cool. Yeah. So check it out. I mean, again, it's like you said, or like we were saying, it's really kind of table stakes. It's not necessarily a big splash thing, but it certainly can make your life easier if you need these capabilities, especially if you're incorporating this into your pipelines for like. If you're doing a big data test or you're doing something around ML or something along those lines, you can programmatically feeding data or do some different.
Yeah. Check it out. Check it out.
All right. So
Okay, so we added one more thing here,
we did.
and this is we use the same words here: change feed support, which brings to mind Cosmos
I know,
change feed.
exactly. When I hear change feed, I think of Cosmos.
Cosmos, yeah.
Right?
So Cosmos DB has a feature called change feed, which basically means it's an event-driven or an event source for changes in Cosmos DB. And so we're kind of bringing that to
blob storage.
So
it's guaranteed, it's ordered, it's durable, and it's read-only, right? So this is basically all the CRUD operations. So, creation, modification, deletion, everything. I shouldn't say read, but create, modify, and delete, right? Because it's basically the life cycle of that particular blob. Right, so it's in the audit log you can see the reads, right? You can see who accessed it, but this is more importantly, it's around it has this changed since the last time, or what incrementally do I need to if I want to update something based on this blob now, not only did it land here, but it changed, right? So you've got access to all the different things that are happening in respect to that resource.
Now, the change feed in Cosmos DB is made concrete through Azure functions. So in other words, when the event happens, it calls a function. That's one of the ways you can do it. It's a little different in Azure Blob Storage. And what we'll find here is that these logs are stored as append blobs in your storage account.
Okay.
And so then you can actually, the whole reason for that is so that you can manage the retention and stuff.
Sure.
But anyway, so that's how you're going to actually go back through and read these things. But it is a feed of changes that get written to an append blob in your storage account.
Gotcha.
It's in preview right now, and if you want to register, it doesn't say that you need approval.
No,
so I'm
it just says
assuming
you can enroll. Yep.
I'm assuming that if you register, then you'll get to start using it.
Yeah.
But I think in some ways this is a call for
input.
Yeah, call for feedback, call for input,
Yep.
and the desire to have customers try to start using this. So if you have a need for the change feed, that might be useful to you, check this out. And if you have a need for a change feed and you're not sure how you could use the append blob, register anyway and take a look at it. And maybe your feedback would be, I'd like to see this as an event grid.
Absolutely,
event,
right? Yeah, I want to
something
see
like
the
that.
surface someplace other than
Yeah,
so absolutely.
So check this out, see what you think, register, try it out, and at some point, hopefully maybe you can even provide some feedback to the product group.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and that's what it's all about, right? Building products that people want.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Awesome. So that kind of takes us to the top of the announcements and the top of the hour. So if anybody has any questions in regards to stuff we talked about today, how can they get a hold of you?
You can catch me at mgarner on Twitter, or you can just email me directly, which is fine too, mgarner@microsoft.com. Happy to take those emails.
Right on. And I can be reached at Azure Flash News. We have the Twitter handle. Absolutely, you can reach us there. Or you can reach me directly at Rick, W-E-Y, @Microsoft.com via email. Again, happy to take email requests or comments, concerns, cheap shots, remarks, etc. By all means. But thanks for tuning into episode 81. We appreciate the time that you take to listen, watch, learn, and love all things Azure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
You can check us out. Don't forget, all of the show notes are on GitHub. You can go to azureflashnews.com. That'll take you right to our GitHub repository. You can catch the show on YouTube, on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher,
all over the place, man.
Yeah. So catch the show when you can.
Please do.
And we really appreciate your time. We know your time is valuable.
We really do. So stay safe, be sane, and learn lots. And until the next time we see you, talk to you, keep your head or your fingers on the keyboards and your head in the cloud.
See you, everybody.